Doctor sat in the transport ship and watched the moon grow bigger on the screen in front of him. Prime was not a pretty place. There were no blue oceans, no green forests, no signs of life anywhere, just rocks and dust and empty sky. The planet was dead and was going to spend the next year of his life on it. He was not happy about this. Back on the space station Prime, the council had given him the job with barely hidden smiles. They did not even try to hide what they thought. A human, assigned to help Princess Myra of the Collective. The room had gone quiet when they announced it, and then he heard the soft sounds of aliens trying not to laugh. Even the translation device picked up the sound of their amusement. Was a doctor, but not the kind that healed people. He studied alien cultures and how different species thought. He had spent his whole life learning about other beings, but no amount of study prepared him for this job. He was going to take care of a royal princess from a civilization that was millions of years old. A princess who was broken in ways that mattered to her people. There were beings made of crystal and light. They connected to each other through something called the quantum network. It was not like talking on a radio or sending messages. It was more like they were all part of one giant mind, even when they were far apart. Every could feel what every other felt. They shared knowledge instantly. They shared emotions. They shared everything. Except Princess Myra. She had been damaged when she was born. A solar flare had hit her during the first moments of her life. It had burned away the part of her that could connect to the network. She was alone in her own mind in a way that her people could not understand. It was like being deaf and blind at the same time, but worse. It was like being cut off from being at all. The council wanted there to keep her from being lonely, but they did not really care. They had a job to give away, and the human was the bottom of the ladder. Nobody important would waste time on a human doctor. Nobody would laugh at them for giving him impossible work. The transport landed on the hard ground with a shaking that threw against his seat. He grabbed the armrest and waited for everything to stop moving. When it did, he got up and looked out the window. The landscape was exactly as ugly as it had looked from space. Rocks, dust, a sky that was not quite black and not quite, and in the distance, a structure that looked like it had grown from the mountain itself. That was the palace of House. Gathered his bags. He had packed light. No point bringing much when nobody expected you to stay longer than necessary. He thought he might last 6 months before he asked to be transferred. Nobody would blame him. This was punishment work and everyone knew it. The palace doors opened as he approached. They were big and made of something that looked like metal but felt warm to the touch. Inside, the air was different. It was clean and very cool. The walls glowed with soft light that seemed to come from nowhere. There were no shadows. There were no windows. It was like being inside something alive. A guard appeared. The used guards sometimes, though, did not understand why. Everyone connected to the network, so there was no privacy anyway. The guard was taller than expected, and his crystal form was cut sharp and angular. He looked dangerous. "Doctor," the guard said. His voice came from a speaker, not from his body. "The princess is in the observation chamber. She requested to meet you there." Nodded. He did not try to make conversation. The guard led him through hallways that twisted in ways that did not make sense. They should have gone one way, but the palace seemed to fold around itself. Finally, they stopped at a large room with one entire wall made of transparent material. Princess Myra was standing at that wall, looking out at the barren landscape. She did not turn around. She did not acknowledge that had entered the room. She just stood there, completely still, like she was a statue. Did not know what to do. He had studied cultures. He had read about customs. He knew that touching them without permission was wrong. He knew that they had complex social rules, but he did not know how to start a conversation with someone who was ignoring him. So he did something very human. He started talking. He said, "I'm here to help you with whatever you need." Myra did not move. Kept talking anyway. "I've never been to your world before. It's very different from Earth. My home is much wetter. We have water everywhere. We have storms and wind and rain. The rain is when water falls from the sky. It's cold and wet and most humans find it annoying, but I like it. There's something about it that feels real, you know. He was rambling now. He knew he was rambling, but he also knew that sometimes rambling was better than silence. And we have trees, plants that grow very tall. Some of them are older than human civilization. They're green, which is a color we get from a chemical in the plant called chlorophyll. It's what lets them eat sunlight and turn it into energy. I know your people use technology to do that. You use quantum something or other, but our trees just do it with chemicals and time. Slow, but it works. Myra finally moved. Her head turned very slowly. She looked at with eyes that were clear as water. They were looking right through him like he was not important, like he was not even there. But she was listening, could see that much. I know I'm not what you expected, said. I'm not very advanced. Humans are the youngest space-faring species in the known galaxy. We've only been flying ships for about 300 years. Your people have been alive for millions of years. I'm like an ant talking to a mountain. But I'm here, and I'm going to stay here as long as you need me to. Myra turned back to the window. She did not speak, but her hand moved slightly, like she was waving him away. Left the observation chamber. The guard was waiting in the hallway. The princess will see you in the morning, the guard said. Your quarters are prepared. Followed the guard to a small room with a bed and a window that looked out at the same wasteland. He sat on the bed and felt the weight of his assignment settle on him like gravity. This was going to be harder than he thought. This princess did not want his help. She did not want anything to do with him. But was stubborn. It was a human trait. He had come to Prime to do a job, and he was going to do it, even if nobody wanted him here, even if the entire galaxy was laughing at him. He lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling and made plans for tomorrow. He would talk to her again. He would keep talking until something changed. He was human. Talking and trying and never giving up was what humans did. Woke up when the light in his room changed. There was no sun on Prime, no natural day and night. The palace controlled everything with artificial light. When the light turned brighter, it meant morning. When it turned dimmer, it meant night. It was not the same as real day and night. But it was what they had. He got up and went to find the observation chamber again. Myra was already there, standing in the same place as yesterday, looking out at the same empty landscape. She did not turn around when he entered. She probably did not even know he was there. But had made a decision. He was going to talk to her every day until something changed. He did not know if this would work. He did not know if she wanted to listen. But he was going to try. I thought about Earth a lot last night, he said. He stood next to her but not too close. He was afraid to get too close. I thought about my family. I have a mother and a father. They are probably worried about me. My mother asked me not to take this job. She said it was too dangerous, that I would get hurt. But I told her I wanted to see the galaxy. I wanted to meet new people. I did not think it would be lonely like this. Myra did not respond, but her hand moved. She lifted it slightly like she was thinking about something, then she put it back down. Took this as a good sign. Maybe she was listening after all. The next day, he came back and talked about Earth's oceans. He described how water covered most of the planet. He talked about waves and tides and the creatures that lived in the deep places. He talked about the salt in the water and how it felt on human skin. He talked about diving deep and seeing colors that existed nowhere else in the universe. Myra did not turn around, but her breathing changed slightly. If she had lungs, if she breathed the way humans breathed, but had something like breathing, their crystal bodies moved and shifted in ways that humans could see if they looked closely. On the 5th day, Myra spoke. Why are you telling me these things? Her voice was strange. It came from a small device on her wrist, not from her mouth. The device translated her thoughts into sound. You waste time. I cannot do anything with information about oceans and water. There is no ocean here. There is no water. Felt something light up inside his chest. She had spoken. She had actually said words to him. Because I thought you might want to know what the rest of the galaxy is like, said. I thought you might want to understand something different, something that is not, something that is human. Myra was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I know what humans are. I do not need to know what oceans are. They do not exist here. They exist somewhere, said. And you exist here. But maybe if you knew about somewhere else, you would understand that you are not alone. You are not the only being that is different from their people. Myra turned around then. She looked at him directly. Her eyes were clear and cold like ice. I am alone, she said. Every on this world can feel every other. They share thoughts. They share feelings. They know what each other is thinking every moment of every day. I cannot do that. I am broken. I am not the only broken thing in the galaxy, but I am the only broken. That is what matters. Looked at her and understood something important. This was not sadness. This was fact. To Myra, it was just the truth of her existence. She was broken. Everyone knew it. She knew it. There was no point in trying to make her feel better. There was only the truth. Yes, said, you are broken and I am weak. Compared to your people, I am very weak. My body will not last as long as yours. I get sick easily. I need air and water and food every day. I am fragile, but I am still here, and I still exist, and I still matter even if I am different from what everyone expects. Myra looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she said, What do you want from me? I want to help you, said. I want to show you that being broken does not mean being worthless. I want to find something that you can do that no other can do, because you are broken in a way that might make you stronger in other ways. Myra turned back to the window, but this time she did not dismiss him. She did not send him away. She just stood there and stood next to her, and they looked out at the barren landscape together. The days turned into weeks, kept talking to Myra. He described Earth in every detail he could remember. He talked about the color green and how it felt to walk through a forest. He talked about rain and wind and the sound of waves on a beach. He talked about human music and human art and the way humans loved each other fiercely and fully, even though they knew they would die. Slowly things began to change. Myra started asking questions. At first they were small questions. What is music? How do humans make art? Why do you love if you know you will die? But the questions became bigger. They became harder. They became personal. One day, Myra asked something that made him stop and think very carefully before answering. Do you think I should have been allowed to live? Did not answer right away. He knew that the wrong answer would hurt her, but he also knew that the wrong answer would be a lie, so he told her the truth. Yes, he said, I think you should have been allowed to live. I think you should have been loved. I think you deserve to exist even if you are different, even if you are broken, even if you will never be like everyone else. I think you matter. I think your life has value. And I think maybe I was sent here to tell you that because nobody else could. Myra did not cry, did not cry. Their eyes did not leak water like human eyes did, but something changed in the way she held her body. She seemed less frozen, less like a statue and more like a living being. Show me, she said. Show me what I can do that is different. Show me how being broken makes me different. Smiled. He had no idea what would happen next. He had no idea if he could actually help her, but he knew that he had just been given a chance. She had decided to let him try. And that was enough for now. The garden was Myra's first project. Had mentioned that Earth had gardens, places where plants grew in controlled spaces. Myra decided they would build one in the palace. It would be small because Prime had very little water, but it would be theirs. The first thing they had to do was study how plants worked, brought up all the information he could find from the palace's data banks. Plants needed light, water, soil, and something called nutrients. They needed warmth and humidity. On Prime, everything was cold and dry, but the palace was warm inside. They could create the conditions that plants needed. Myra surprised by being very good at planning. She had never worked with her hands before. On her home world, all work was done through the quantum network. did not need to build things themselves. They could think what they wanted to happen and machines would do it. But Myra could not connect to the network. She could not think her commands into the system. So she had to plan and design using drawings and words like a human would do. They spent weeks preparing a room in the lower part of the palace. They installed lights that would mimic the sun. They created a water system that would keep the soil moist. They brought in dirt from different parts of Prime, even though it was hard and dead and seemed useless. Told her that dead soil could be made alive again. You just had to feed it the right things. Like a body, Myra said. Yes, said, very much like a body. Soil is alive too, just in a different way than we are. There are creatures in it so small that you cannot see them. They break down dead things and turn them into food for plants. Everything feeds something else. Everything is connected. Myra looked at him with something that might have been understanding. The quantum network, she said. It is like that, but with thoughts instead of nutrients, are all connected. We feed each other's minds. We grow from being part of the same system. Yes, said, and you are separated from it. But maybe being separated from it means you can see it differently. Maybe you can understand how it works in a way that someone inside it cannot. They planted seeds that had brought from Earth. Most of them would not grow. The gravity was different. The light was artificial. The water was processed by machines. But some of them might survive. Myra was patient as they waited to see what would happen. While the garden grew slowly, Myra learned about human history, told her about the ancient times when humans were still learning how to use fire. He told her about wars and peace, about building cities and creating art. He told her about how humans had traveled across their oceans not knowing what they would find. He told her about how humans had looked at the stars and wanted to reach them, even though the stars were impossibly far away. We are not advanced like you, said. We are young and weak, but we have something that you have taught me about. We have individual minds. Each human thinks for themselves. We argue, we fight. We love in different ways. We create different art. We have different dreams. We do not have a network that connects us all together, so we have learned to be creative about finding each other. Myra was working in the garden when she said, "The network is not always good. I have heard things in the memories of other. Before the network was perfect, before we learned to connect fully, we were like you. We were individuals. We had more conflict, but we also had more discovery. We created more. We wanted more. But then the network gave us peace. It gave us perfect understanding, and we stopped needing to create." "And you think that was bad?" asked. "I think it was easy," Myra said. "I think we chose easy over difficult. And now we are so advanced that we cannot imagine being less. We cannot imagine choosing the hard path. But being separated from the network, being alone like I am, I have had to choose the hard path. I have had to think for myself. I have had to create instead of just being." One morning woke to find the small green shoots of the first successful plant breaking through the soil. It was small. It was fragile. It would probably die in a few days. But it was alive. It had grown from nothing in the middle of a dead world. Myra stood and looked at it for a very long time without moving. "Why did you want me to see this?" she asked. "Because it is impossible," said. "By all the logic of Prime, this plant should not exist. It should not be able to grow. But it is growing anyway. It is doing something that nobody expected. It is defying what should be true." Myra looked at him and understood. He was talking about her. She was the plant. She was the impossible thing that should not exist but did. Over the next few months, the garden grew. More plants survived. They created an area of green in the middle of stone and metal. It was beautiful in a simple way. Did not usually create beauty. Beauty served no function, but Myra wanted to create it anyway. She wanted to have something that existed just because it was good to have it, just because it made life less empty. Others came to visit the palace sometimes. They would look at the garden with confusion. They would ask why Myra was wasting resources on something that had no purpose. Myra would tell them that it had every purpose. It meant that one broken and one weak human had created something together that had never been created before on Prime. The galaxy did not know about the garden yet. The reports that came from Prime still said only that the princess was stable and being monitored. The human was adequate. There was nothing interesting happening here, nothing worth paying attention to. But something was changing. Myra was learning to think like a human, and was learning to think like a, and together they were becoming something new, something that had never existed before in the galaxy. Neither of them knew yet that the galaxy was about to have a crisis that would need exactly what they had learned. They did not know that everything they had built here in secret would suddenly become valuable beyond measure. For now they were just two broken beings in a garden on a dead world, and that was enough. The message arrived on a normal morning. Myra was in the garden, checking on a new plant that had started to grow. The message came through the palace communication system, the same system that Myra could not access. The guard came to find her and told her what the message said. A temporal anomaly had opened near the ships were being destroyed, thousands of lives lost in moments. The quantum network which connected all minds was filled with panic and pain. Even though Myra could not connect to the network, the guard could, and the guard relayed what he was feeling. The fear was so strong that it made the guard's crystal body glow with a light that looked like pain. The council was requesting all return home immediately. This included Myra. This included everyone, no matter who they were or what they were doing. The greatest emergency in modern history was happening, and they needed everyone. Myra did not hesitate. She did not complain about leaving her garden. She did not worry about what would happen to the plants. She gathered what she could carry and told they were leaving. Understood immediately what this meant. He was human. He was weak. He had no technology. He had no place in a galactic emergency. The right thing to do was stay on Prime and keep the palace running. But Myra looked at him and said, "You are coming with me." "I cannot help," said. "I will only be in the way." "You have helped me more than anyone else in my entire life," Myra said. "You are coming. If I die in this emergency, then you will die too, and that is acceptable." They reached the on a fast transport that Myra called for. The world was beautiful. It was everything that Prime was not. There were structures that looked like they were grown rather than built. There were lights that moved like water through crystal pathways. They were everywhere, and they were all in a state of extreme distress. The quantum network was so full of fear and pain that it made the air feel wrong. Humans could not connect to it, but they could feel it. The distress was so strong that it pressed on like gravity trying to crush him. The temporal anomaly was visible from certain points on the world. It looked like a wound in space itself. It was not a ship. It was not a weapon. It was something that nobody had ever seen before. It was growing. Every moment it expanded, and it destroyed everything in its path. The council had gathered in the central chamber. The greatest minds of the civilization were there, and they were failing. Every solution they tried did not work. They could not fight it with weapons. They could not contain it with technology. They could not negotiate with it. It was not alive, and it was not dead. It simply was, and it was hungry for something that they could not give it. The council was shocked to see Myra. They welcomed her, but only because protocol demanded it. Myra was broken. She was not part of the network. She could not help, but they had to acknowledge her. She was still Princess of House. Then they saw. The distress on their faces was immediate. A human, a weak, fragile human had come to a galactic emergency. It was insulting. It was absurd. Some of the council members turned away, too insulted to even look at him. But Myra brought to the center of the chamber and said, "He is here because I brought him. You will listen to him if he has something to say." For hours, they tried different approaches. The greatest scientists in the galaxy worked themselves to exhaustion. The network should have given them answer, but the network was too full of fear to think clearly. The fear was flooding back and forth between millions of connected minds, making clear thought almost impossible. Watched, he said nothing. He just watched and listened and tried to understand what he was seeing. Finally, he said, "That thing is moving like it is looking for something." Everyone stopped and looked at him. "It moves in patterns," continued. "It is not random. See how it always moves toward the areas of highest energy. It is like every living thing that exists. It moves toward what feeds it. Every animal, every organism, every living thing seeks food. It moves toward energy because energy is what it needs." The council dismissed this as too simple, but Myra understood what was saying. She understood because she had lived with long enough to understand how human minds worked. Human minds saw patterns in simple things. Human minds understood hunger and seeking and survival. "What if we stop giving it energy?" Myra said. "That is impossible," a council member said. "We cannot turn off the energy of a world." "But we could create a space with no energy," Myra said. She was building on this idea now, translating it into technology. "The anomaly seeks energy. If we create a barrier of non-energy, a quantum void, it would have to go around it. It would lose momentum. It would stop growing." "That is not how quantum mechanics work," another council member said. "No," Myra said, "but we have been thinking in ways that the network teaches us. What if we think like something else? What if we think like something that has never been part of the network? What if we think like something broken?" The council spent 3 days working on the solution. They used technology and knowledge, but they thought in new ways. They thought like an individual mind that had never been part of a collective. They thought like had taught Myra to think. And it worked. The barrier went up. The anomaly hit it and could not get through. It started to shrink instead of grow. The hunger turned inward. The wound in space began to close. The ship stopped exploding. The people in the quantum network began to feel hope instead of pain. When it was over, Myra was celebrated as a hero. Standing next to her was barely acknowledged, but that was human. That was how the galaxy worked. The powerful species celebrated the powerful species. The weak ones served and were forgotten. But something had changed in the quantum network. For the first time in history, they had been forced to think like individuals. They had been forced to think outside the network, and they had discovered that being connected and being individual were not the same thing. They had discovered that sometimes the best solutions came from minds that did not work the way they worked. Myra refused to return to her old life. She told the council she wanted a new role. She wanted to be a bridge between the collective and the younger species. She wanted to help them see that advancement did not mean losing individuality. She wanted to teach them that sometimes being broken was the only way to become whole. Was packing his things when Myra found him. He had a small bag with his clothes and his personal items. Nothing important. The things that had kept him sane during his time on Prime. A photograph of his family. A book from Earth. Some music that played through a small device. "You are leaving," Myra said. It was not a question. "Yes," said. "My assignment is complete. You do not need me anymore. The council will not accept a human walking around their world. It is time for me to go back to Earth." Myra was silent for a long moment. Then she said something that made stop packing and look at her. "I need you," she said. "I need you more now than I did when you arrived. I need you because you see things that I cannot see. I need you because you think in ways that I have learned to value. I need you because the galaxy has forgotten how to be individual, and you are the only one who can teach them." Put down his bag. "The council will never accept it. I am human. I am weak. I am beneath them." "Yes," Myra said. "And we need that. We need someone beneath us to remind us that we are not gods. We need someone who struggles. We need someone who cannot access the quantum network. We need you to stay." So stayed. The news traveled through the galaxy slowly. The human who had saved the weak species that had given the old civilization a solution their own genius could not find. The story was repeated and twisted and changed, but the core truth remained. The human had mattered. The human had made a difference. Other species began to notice. The younger races that had always felt inferior now wondered if maybe being young meant something. Maybe being less advanced meant something. Maybe their limitations were not only weaknesses. Maybe they were also strengths. Myra created a new division. It was called the Institute for Individual Thought. It was located on Prime, on the barren moon that had become beautiful. Young came to study there. They learned to think without the network. They learned what it felt like to be alone in your own mind. They learned that this was not terrible. It was just different. Other species sent representatives. They sent a mathematician who had always felt inadequate because she thought slower than others of her kind. The Ancient Ones sent a philosopher who had been exiled for disagreeing with the collective wisdom. Humans sent scientists and artists and people who wanted to learn from a broken princess and the human she had chosen to stand beside. The garden that and Myra had created together became the heart of the Institute. Students would work in the garden and think about what they were learning. They would touch the soil that had been dead and was now alive. They would understand that change was possible. That transformation was possible. That being broken did not mean being worthless. 3 years after the temporal anomaly was closed, Myra stood in the garden and looked at what had grown. The plants covered large areas now. There were flowers that bloomed in colors that should not exist on Prime. There were fruit trees that produced food. There were places of beauty and peace in the middle of a barren world. Stood next to her, older now. Humans aged faster than. He would not live as long as she would. This was something they had talked about many times. It was sad and real and something they had accepted. "Do you regret staying?" Myra asked him. "No," said. "I came here thinking I was being punished. I thought my career was over. I thought I was being given to a broken princess as a forgotten human should be, but I was wrong. This has been the most important work of my life." "I regret nothing either," Myra said, "but I want you to know something. When you die, and you will die before I do, I will make sure the galaxy remembers you. I will make sure they know that a weak human from a young species saved a civilization that had forgotten how to think. I will make sure they know that you mattered." "I already know I matter," said. "I knew it the moment you decided to let me help you in the garden." The galaxy laughed at the broken princess and the weak human for many years. They laughed about how she had stayed with him, how she had made him important, how she had built an entire institute around his ideas. The old species thought it was strange and wasteful. They thought it showed that something had broken in Myra's mind. But slowly, things changed. Young species began to succeed in ways that older species had stopped trying. The quantum network began to experience something it had not experienced in millions of years: doubt. And doubt made them think, and thinking made them create. When finally died, it was on the beach of a new ocean that the Institute had managed to create on Prime. The water was brought from other worlds. It took years to establish, but it was there, and it was real, and it was alive with creatures and plants and life that had no business existing on that barren moon. Myra sat beside him as he died. She could not cry, but her crystal form dimmed slightly, and the light that usually refracted from her body became softer, gentler, like she was less bright without him. The galaxy heard about his death and finally understood. They understood that every species had value. They understood that weakness could be strength. They understood that innovation came from different ways of thinking. They understood that sometimes the greatest gift one being could give another was the courage to be broken. Myra lived for another 100 years after died. She changed the collective. She brought back individuality to a civilization that had almost forgotten what it meant. She taught them that being connected and being individual were not enemies. They could be the same thing. And when Young asked her about her greatest achievement, She would take them to the garden and show them the plants that had helped her grow. She would tell them that her greatest achievement was learning from someone weaker than her. She would tell them that a human from a young species had saved not just one civilization but the idea of civilization itself. The galaxy had ridiculed her assignment. A broken princess guarded by a weak human. What a waste of resources. What a joke to the greater powers of the universe. But the joke was on the galaxy, because the two most unlikely beings in the cosmos had changed everything. They had proved that strength did not always look like power. They had proved that wisdom did not always come from age. They had proved that sometimes the most important things in the galaxy were the things that were broken, the things that were weak, the things that nobody expected to matter. And they did matter. They mattered more than anyone could have imagined.